Hi. Before we begin this incredible story, I want to know, where are you watching from? Write in the comments, because I love getting to know everyone who follows these adventures around the world. If you enjoy mysteries, old houses, and secrets that defy time, subscribe to the channel now. That way you won't miss any intriguing stories full of suspense and surprising revelations. Also, turn on notifications to receive all updates and become part of this community that loves solving mysteries just like you. The mansion stood isolated at the end of a dirt road, forgotten by time, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Built decades before, its imposing architecture contrasted sharply with the evident neglect: dust-covered windows, rusty gates, and a heavy, almost suffocating silence that clashed with the modern world around it. It was there that Daniel Carter, a real estate investor known for transforming dilapidated properties into huge profits, decided to take a chance. He wasn't a superstitious man. For him, houses were about numbers, structures, and opportunities. Old stories, rumors, and local legends were nothing more than exaggerations that scared away ordinary buyers and created an advantage for someone like him. What caught his attention was not only the price, which was well below market value, but an almost hidden detail in the contract. The property had remained untouched since 1940. No heir had come forward to claim it, and the records about the previous owners were incomplete, as if part of the history had been deliberately erased. While signing the documents, the broker displayed a discomfort that was difficult to disguise. His voice was lower than usual when he asked one last question, suggesting that perhaps it would be better not to change everything immediately. Daniel simply nodded, dismissing it. The more original the house was, the greater its historical value. On the first day, he arrived alone, carrying only a flashlight, his cell phone, and a folder with copies of the few documents he had managed to gather. The idea was simple: to conduct an initial assessment before starting any renovations. As soon as he pushed open the main gate, the metallic sound echoed through the empty lot, spreading strangely, as if traversing not only the space, but the very silence of that place. The front door was slow to open. When it finally did, a heavy air escaped from within, laden with dust and an old, indefinable smell. Daniel entered cautiously, observing the main hall. A chandelier covered in cobwebs still hung from the ceiling, and the furniture remained arranged as if someone had left in a hurry, never to return. His footsteps echoed across the wooden floor as he explored the rooms. On a small table, a stopped clock read 3:17. He noticed the detail, but didn't think much of it at the time. He climbed the stairs, opened doors, examined walls, windows, and structures. Everything seemed simply abandoned until he reached the end of the hallway. There, a different door caught his attention, more robust, with a reinforced lock that stood out from the rest of the house. Daniel tried to turn the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. Looking closer, he noticed marks on the wood around the lock, as if someone had tried to force entry in the past. This wasn't mentioned in any documents. He went back downstairs, trying to maintain the technical focus of the inspection. In the partially preserved kitchen, something caught his eye. A displaced cabinet revealed a narrow opening. Pushing it open, he discovered a staircase leading down to a lower level. The basement did not appear on any of the plans. The flashlight's light illuminated the first steps, covered in a thick layer of dust. There were no recent footprints. Daniel descended slowly, feeling a growing unease he couldn't explain. When he reached the bottom, he found bare concrete walls and a cold, overly silent space. That's when he saw the door, made of iron, thick. Unlike anything else in the house, she was locked from the outside. Daniel approached slowly, observing the rusted metal. As he wiped the surface with his hand, he revealed engraved numbers: 1940. Just below, there were deep, irregular marks, like scratches, but they didn't seem to have been made from the outside. They seemed to have come from inside. For the first time, he felt something he couldn't rationalize. It wasn't just curiosity, it was an unsettling, almost instinctive feeling. He went back upstairs and reviewed the documents once more. Among old papers, he found a brief note, almost irrelevant at first glance. Domestic incident, investigation closed. There were no names, no explanations. Daniel slowly closed the folder. This wasn't just an abandoned house. There was something there that someone had tried to hide or keep locked away. Outside, as night was falling, he looked at the mansion in the dim moonlight. He knew the wisest course of action would be to leave, call in experts, and follow procedures. But that wasn't what he decided. He would return, and next time I would open that door. Daniel returned to the mansion the next day more prepared, but also more uneasy. Unlike the cold confidence that had accompanied him on the first day, now a silent tension guided his steps. He brought basic inspection equipment, a camera, and enough tools to open old structures if necessary. Still, he avoided thinking directly about the iron door in the basement. The surrounding environment seemed different, even though it was the same. Daylight streamed through the dirty windows, creating irregular beams that illuminated particles of dust suspended in the air. The silence persisted, but now it didn't just seem like an absence of sound. It was as if the house was waiting. Daniel decided to start with the nearest town. He needed to understand the property's history before making any physical move. In the municipal archives, he encountered resistance. Many old records were incomplete or simply no longer existed. Still, after persistence, an older employee pointed him to a name that was rarely mentioned: the Whitmore family. According to her, the mansion had belonged to that family until the early 1940s. After that, no one spoke clearly about them anymore. There was no officially registered sale, nor any known heirs. Just silence. Curious, Daniel went to a small local library. There, among old newspapers, he found a brief article dated 1940. The text was vague, mentioning only a domestic incident that had mobilized authorities for a few days. There were no details about victims, causes, or consequences. The case was closed quickly, but there was something strange. A photograph accompanied the article. The image showed the mansion surrounded by period vehicles and some people observing from a distance. Upon enlarging the photo, Daniel noticed something that hadn't been mentioned in the text. The basement windows were completely sealed from the inside. That was unusual. Back at the mansion, he began to notice details he had previously overlooked. The ground floor walls had small, almost imperceptible marks, as if furniture had been repeatedly dragged in the same pattern. In the upstairs hallway, near the locked door, there were slight differences in the wood's tone, suggesting that something heavy had been leaning against it for a long time. He tried again to open the hallway door, this time with tools. The lock resisted longer than expected. When it finally gave way, the sound echoed abruptly, breaking the silence of the house. The room was empty, but it wasn't an ordinary void. The walls were completely clean, without any marks from furniture, pictures, or any sign of use. In the center, the floor had circular scratches, as if something had been moved repeatedly in that same spot. Daniel walked over and crouched down. The wood was different, slightly newer than the rest of the floor. He hit it with the tool. "I am a dad." There was something underneath. Before he could react, a noise coming from the floor below made him freeze. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. A slight impact, followed by something that seemed to be dragging itself. Daniel remained motionless for a few seconds, trying to identify the source. The house returned to absolute silence, as if nothing had happened. He descended slowly. Each step on the stairs felt heavier, more conscious. Reaching the kitchen, she looked directly at the basement entrance. Everything looked the same. No sign of intrusion, no visible change. Even so, he knew that something had happened. "As I descended back into the basement, The air felt even colder. The flashlight revealed the same scene as before. Bare walls, dusty floor, and in the background the iron door. But now there was something different. The dust outside the door was stirred up, subtle, almost imperceptible, but recent marks, as if something had moved there. Daniel approached slowly, feeling his heart race uncontrollably for the first time. He ran his hand over the surface of the door again. The scratches were still there, but now they seemed more evident, as if they had been enhanced by time or by something else. He pressed his ear against the metal. Silence. Then, for a brief second, something, a low, muffled sound. It wasn't clear enough to identify, but it wasn't the type of noise a structure would make on its own. Daniel quickly walked away. That couldn't be explained with simple logic. Still, his mind tried to find justifications: metal expansion, structural movement, trapped animals, but no explanation seemed sufficient. That night, he decided not to leave. He set up a small observation post in the main room, with the camera positioned to record any movement. If something was happening in that house, he would prove it. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, shortly after midnight, a sound echoed through the house. This is it. Dragged. Coming from below. Daniel stood up immediately, grabbed the flashlight, and stood there for a few seconds, just listening. The sound repeated itself, clearer now. It came from the basement, and it didn't seem like a small thing. He took a deep breath. This time, it wasn't just curiosity. It was a certainty that that house held something that should never have been forgotten, and that, somehow, was still there. Daniel didn't go down immediately that night. For the first time, he hesitated. He stood at the top of the stairs leading to the basement, holding the lantern tightly as the dragging sound ceased as suddenly as it had begun. The silence that followed brought no relief. It brought doubt. It was as if something down there knew it was being watched. Still, he went down. Each step seemed to compress the surrounding air. Upon reaching the basement floor, he pointed the light directly at the iron door. Nothing moved. No sound, no obvious sign of change. But something was wrong. The lock. Daniel approached slowly, examining it carefully. He was absolutely certain that the day before, the padlock had been facing left. Now it was tilted slightly downwards, as if it had been touched or tested. He ran his hand over the cold metal. The padlock remained firmly closed. Still, the feeling that he wasn't alone there intensified. Without wasting any time, he went back upstairs and brought back his heaviest tools. If there was any doubt, he needed to eliminate it. Logic was still his greatest defense against whatever was happening. Back in the basement, he positioned himself in front of the door and began to work on the padlock. The metallic sound of his attempts echoed through the enclosed space, breaking the silence aggressively. After a few minutes, the padlock gave way with a dry snap, but the door did not open. She seemed trapped inside. Daniel frowned, now more intrigued than frightened. He adjusted his position, pushed harder. Nothing. It was as if something on the other side was preventing it from opening. Then came the sound. This time, he wasn't being dragged. It was a shock. Strong, coming from within. Daniel instinctively recoiled, his heart racing. The flashlight trembled in his hand, its light flickering across the room. He stood motionless, trying to process what he had just heard. That couldn't possibly be a structure. It couldn't have been the wind, and it definitely wasn't small. Silence returned, but now it felt heavier, closer. He knew he had to go upstairs, get out of the house, call for help, but it didn't come out. Instead, he went back upstairs and decided to investigate the other strange spot he had found, the hollow floor in the locked room. If something was hidden there, it might help him understand what was happening in the basement. Using a pry tool, he began to remove the floorboards. The wood gave way with difficulty, revealing a narrow space just below. Inside, there was a metal box, old, rusty, but intact. Daniel pulled the box out and carefully opened it. Inside, he found documents, photographs, and a small notebook. As he flipped through the pages, he realized they were handwritten notes, probably by someone who lived in that house. The first few pages were confusing, with fragmented accounts of strange behavior inside the mansion, noises during the night, objects out of place, a constant feeling of being watched. But as it progressed, the records became more specific and more disturbing. There were mentions of something in the basement, something that shouldn't be there, something that, according to the author, had not been brought into the house, but was found there. Daniel continued reading, feeling the tension grow with each line. The author described attempts to isolate it, to prevent it from getting out. He spoke of reinforcing the iron door, of sealing off access, and at one point mentioned the need to keep everything closed, regardless of what was heard. One of the last pages had irregular handwriting, as if it had been written in a hurry. "He is no longer alone," Daniel froze. A sound coming from the lower floor interrupted his reading. Steps, boards, clearly defined, in the basement. Unlike anything he had heard before, it had rhythm, weight, presence. He stood up slowly, notebook still in hand, trying not to make a sound. Every instinct told him not to go back downstairs. But there was something even more unsettling. The sound wasn't just coming from the basement. He was approaching the stairs. Daniel took a step back. The air felt colder, denser. Then the sound stopped, right at the beginning of the stairs. Silence returned, but it wasn't emptiness. It was expected. Daniel held his breath, his eyes fixed on the darkness rising from the basement. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, something began to rise. It wasn't possible to see yet, but it was coming. And at that moment, Daniel understood that the real problem had never been opening the door. It was because he got too close to her. In the following days, the mansion began to reveal new layers of mystery that weren't in the old documents or notes. Daniel started noticing small changes he couldn't explain. Objects seemed to have been moved. Details he was sure he'd left in place were out of place. A chair leaning against the wall tilted differently. A small drawer was ajar that he remembered being closed. Nothing that would justify intruders, nothing that could be officially recorded, but enough to cause constant unease. Meanwhile, in his research in the city, Daniel began to realize that the Whitmore family history had ramifications that no one openly discussed. Longtime neighbors, few still alive, remembered strange visitors arriving at the mansion in the 1940s, men and women who were never seen in public records, always in a hurry, always silent. An elderly lady recounted, in an almost conspiratorial tone, that the Whitmore family didn't deal with ordinary domestic problems. There was a secret that should remain buried, something that even the police didn't seem willing to touch. Her words weren't clear, but the suggestion was enough to stir Daniel's mind. He felt both drawn in and fearful at the same time. Inside the mansion, Daniel began to explore rooms he had previously ignored. A small office hidden behind a bookcase revealed diaries and letters that were not in the metal box. Among the yellowed pages, messages from one of the former residents indicated attempts to communicate with someone or something that inhabited the house. The accounts were fragmented, frighteningly detailed at times, sounds coming from the basement at night, objects moving on their own, shadows that moved without explanation. Each detail added tension to the narrative, as if the house were alive, reacting to Daniel's presence. At the same time, secondary relationships began to emerge. A neighbor, drawn by the unusual activity on the property, decided to approach, offering help under the guise of historical interest. Daniel, skeptical, kept his distance, but realized that the interaction created new layers of tension. The neighbor seemed to know more than he let on, and his insistent questions aroused in Daniel a distrust he couldn't ignore. His presence added complexity to the situation. Daniel needed to deal with the threat of the unknown within, what was in the basement, and with the external uncertainty represented by the curious neighbor. While exploring, Daniel discovered a personal diary belonging to one of the Whitmore daughters. The pages revealed an intense family conflict involving betrayals, inheritance disputes, and constant fear of what lay within the mansion. The narrative intertwined with the discovery of the basement. Each entry suggested that the secret kept there was the core of all the family's fears and tensions. Daniel realized it wasn't just about curiosity or profit. There was a living history of tragedies and desperate efforts to keep something hidden. Each subplot was intrinsically linked to the main conflict, reinforcing the mystery and tension surrounding it. Time pressure began to intensify. Strange sounds during the night, objects moving on their own, the constant feeling of being watched. All this created a silent urgency. Daniel knew he needed to act, but each wrong step could reveal something he wasn't yet prepared to face. The pace accelerated as small clues connected, forcing him to make quick decisions, leaving no room for hesitation. Personal subplots, family secrets, and the inexplicable presence of the basement created an increasingly complex plot, maintaining the focus on the central mystery but adding depth and tension to the narrative. With each new discovery, Daniel was forced to question his own perceptions. What seemed logical often clashed with inexplicable evidence. The diary mentioned nighttime encounters, objects that disappeared and reappeared in different places, and sounds that no one else could have heard. Each detail seemed to contribute to a pattern he couldn't yet decipher, but which inevitably connected to the basement and the secret that would remain buried for decades. The subplots intertwined organically, creating a web of mystery that expanded without losing focus on the main conflict. What had been hidden in the mansion since 1940 and why it remained hidden. One night, as the moon partially illuminated the rooms of the mansion, Daniel noticed something that changed everything. He had been focused on the basement, the boxes, the diaries, and the old photographs, but something new caught his attention. One of the walls in the upper hallway looked slightly different. A small crack, almost imperceptible during the day, now stood out under the flashlight. Curious, he approached and touched the surface. To his surprise, the wall gave way slightly, revealing a hidden door. Narrow, simple, but impossible to ignore. Daniel's heart raced. That door wasn't on any blueprint, nor in any record he had found. He immediately realized he had underestimated the complexity of the house. It wasn't just the basement. The entire mansion held secrets, layers upon layers of mysteries that no one had dared to explore for decades. Something had been intentionally hidden, as if every detail had been carefully considered so that curious onlookers would never discover the truth. Without a second thought, he opened the door. A narrow corridor stretched before him, shrouded in darkness. The air there was different, heavy, damp, almost strangely breathable. Each step he took echoed like a warning. At the end of the corridor, a staircase descended abruptly, steeper than the one in the basement, leading to a chamber that seemed to have been sealed since 1940. The presence of something ancient, powerful and inexplicable, filled the air with an almost palpable tension. When Daniel turned on the flashlight inside the chamber, the light reflected off something metallic on the floor. Approaching, he realized it wasn't just any object. It was an ancient, immense safe with embossed inscriptions he couldn't immediately decipher. But there was something even more disturbing, marks around the safe, like recent, irregular scratches, indicating that someone, or something, had tried to open it recently. Logic dictated he was alone, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Suddenly, a noise from the end of the hallway made Daniel freeze. A low, dragging, almost human sound, mixed with something metallic. He knew he wasn't imagining things. Something was there, in the darkness, watching his every move. For the first time, real fear seeped into his mind. The feeling of being watched intensified, dominating every rational thought. He realized that the mansion wasn't just a relic of the past. It reacted to his presence. Before he could react, something moved inside the chamber. A figure, quick and silent, glided through the shadows. Daniel swung the flashlight, trying to focus, but it was too late. The figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind an almost inaudible whisper. "You shouldn't be here." The sound cut through the air, chilling Daniel down his spine. The reality he knew, based on logic and facts, seemed to unravel. Everything indicated that there was more to the mansion than just old stories or forgotten records. Daniel stepped back, stumbling over old objects scattered on the floor, and realized that the situation had completely changed. The mystery of the basement was only the surface. Each layer he uncovered revealed more questions than answers. The mansion was not just an abandoned house. It was a labyrinth of secrets, a space where time seemed distorted and where ancient presences still held sway over what should remain hidden. At that moment, Daniel understood that the turning point wasn't simply opening doors or discovering old documents. The real turning point was realizing he had never been in control. The mansion dictated its rules, and every action he took provoked unpredictable reactions. Fear and curiosity now coexisted, and any misstep could lead to irreversible consequences. He knew he could no longer just observe. He needed to quickly understand what he was facing, or the mansion itself would consume not only his time, but his very reality. After the discovery of the secret chamber, the mansion changed almost imperceptibly, but Daniel immediately felt the difference. The air was thicker. The everyday sounds of the house, creaks, wind blowing through the windows, drops of water running down the ceiling, seemed closer, more laden with meaning. He realized that his every action now had palpable effects, as if the house itself reacted to his presence. In the following days, objects began to move more noticeably. A book he had carefully placed on a table reappeared on the hallway floor. An old painting, which had previously been crooked, now hung perfectly straight, but with a tilt that cast strange shadows on the walls. Every detail seemed to carry a message. He wasn't just uncovering ancient secrets. He was interacting with something that still lived there, waiting. Furthermore, Daniel's mind began to strain. The feeling of being watched intensified, not only because of the figure he had seen, but also because of the awareness that the records and diaries didn't tell the whole story. He began to question his own decisions, blaming himself for going so deep. But, at the same time, there was an irresistible urge to continue. Each partial answer revealed more questions, and the urgency to unravel the secret of the basement and the camera grew stronger. Interaction with the neighbors also brought unexpected consequences. The curious neighbor, who had previously seemed merely interested, became a disturbing presence. He appeared in the vicinity of the house at unusual hours, asked subtle questions about Daniel's recent movements, and displayed knowledge of details that Daniel himself had only recently discovered. This constant presence added a social tension, a reminder that the secrets of the mansion were not confined within its walls. Someone was watching, and Daniel could not ignore it. Internally, Daniel began to grapple with the emotional impact of what he was discovering. Every noise, every displaced object, every unexpected shadow was amplified in his mind. He started recording everything, creating maps, notes, and diagrams of the house, of the locations where noises occurred and where objects moved. It was an attempt to regain control, to establish logic amidst the chaos. But the more he tried to organize, the clearer it became that the mansion had its own rules and limits. And then came the direct encounters. Small events that couldn't be ignored. Doors closing on their own. Footsteps upstairs when he was alone downstairs. Whispers that didn't come from any visible mouth. Daniel began to realize that the secret wasn't just an object or document, but the very presence of the mansion. The basement, the secret chamber, and every room held fragments of a story that was still trying to reveal itself, but resisted being fully understood. The consequences began to manifest physically as well. Daniel had interrupted nights, vivid dreams that mixed memories of the house with figures and sounds impossible to decipher. The mental tension translated into fatigue, nervousness, and momentary lapses in concentration during his explorations. Each step towards the main secret required more care, more preparation, and each miscalculated action had the potential to trigger unexpected events. He was trapped in a cycle of discovery and reaction, each move shaping the sequence of events that followed. At the heart of it all, Daniel realized a crucial truth. The mansion wasn't just a place to investigate. It reacted, tested, punished, and revealed according to its own logic. The consequences of each action weren't immediate, but inevitable, like pieces of an ancient mechanism that functioned in perfect synchronicity with the mystery it held. He understood now that unraveling the secret would require more than courage. It would require patience, strategy, and above all, attention to the signs the house gave him at every moment. In the days that followed, Daniel began to notice subtle changes in himself. The fear that had previously paralyzed him began to transform into focus and determination. Every strange noise, every shadow, every displaced object ceased to be merely a threat. It became a challenge he needed to understand and master. He learned to control his anxiety, to observe every detail of the mansion with almost obsessive attention, noticing patterns that had previously escaped him. The unknown, which had seemed overwhelming, now became a stimulus for his analytical mind. He began to explore the basement and the room more strategically. Instead of acting impulsively, he started recording every movement, every sound, every mark on the walls. He created his own system to map the house, associating sounds and changes with specific times and situations. Gradually, he managed to distinguish patterns. Scratches appeared at certain times of the night. Objects always moved in repetitive trajectories, and certain whispers seemed to respond to gestures or human presence. The mansion hadn't lost its mystery, but Daniel began to understand it more deeply, as if he were decoding a living enigma. Daniel's growth was also reflected in his interaction with his curious neighbor. Previously distrustful and cautious, he began to use his neighbor's presence to his advantage, observing his reactions and trying to discern his intentions. He discovered that some of the information his neighbor shared were fragments of ancient knowledge that could help him understand the history of the Whitmore family and the basement. Daniel learned to balance trust and caution, using unexpected allies to advance his investigation without fully exposing himself. At the same time, the mansion seemed to test his resilience in new ways. Events that would have previously paralyzed him, doors slamming shut on their own, shadows in the corner of his eye, sudden noises, were now faced with control and strategy. He began to move through the house without hesitation, confronting the unknown head-on, registering every detail, learning to interpret signs and act precisely. Each small success increased his confidence and shaped his transformation. The most important discovery, however, came from an unexpected understanding. The secret of the basement and the chamber was not merely physical, but symbolic. The marks, the documents, the objects, the whispers, everything represented a story that demanded not only courage, but perception and patience to be revealed. Daniel understood that overcoming the mansion meant not only opening doors or finding documents, but deciphering the internal logic of that place and understanding the boundaries between the past and the present, between the house and himself. This evolution was tested when a new night brought more intense events. The figure he had seen before reappeared, this time moving more noticeably, as if observing and reacting to his actions. Daniel did not back down. He confronted the unknown figure with the flashlight, analyzing each movement, learning to anticipate patterns, avoiding panic, and remaining calm. For the first time, he felt that he was not just a victim of the house, but an active participant in the unfolding story. Daniel's growth was also evident in how he dealt with the mystery of the Whitmore family. Each diary, each letter, and each old record was studied with patience and attention. He not only collected information, but connected the dots, reconstructing the narrative with logic and sensitivity. He uncovered nuances of betrayal, fear, courage, and secrets kept for decades, and this helped him understand that the real challenge was not just physical, but mental and emotional. In the end, Daniel not only survived the mansion, he learned from it. Each obstacle became a lesson, each fright a discipline, each discovery a strategy. The protagonist evolved from someone consumed by fear to someone capable of facing the unknown with rationality and courage, showing that overcoming challenges was both internal and external. He prepared to advance even further, aware that the climax of his journey would demand everything he had learned, every skill developed, every perception honed. With the growth and confidence he gained, Daniel began to meticulously organize his actions. He realized that every detail of the mansion could be crucial, and that haste could be fatal. He began to review all the records and diaries he found, comparing dates, events, and patterns of behavior within the house. Each note that previously seemed isolated now gained meaning when connected to the others, forming a mental map of the mansion and the mysterious forces that seemed to control the basement and the secret chamber. Meanwhile, the signs intensified. Low sounds coming from the basement, shadows subtly moving across the walls, displaced objects, everything indicated that something was aware of his movements. Daniel learned to interpret these signs, using them to plan his next steps. He decided to create contingency strategies, extra flashlights, tools to open doors, improvised cameras, and detailed notes of each critical point. There was no room for error. The escalating tension demanded precision and attention. The subplots began to partially resolve themselves. The curious neighbor, now perceived as a strategic ally, brought valuable information about the Whitmore family history, confirming details that Daniel suspected but couldn't prove. This collaboration, though tense, allowed him to better understand the limits of the mystery and the possible paths the basement concealed. The interaction added more layers to the narrative, showing that not all threats came from invisible forces. Some were linked to ambition, curiosity, or human self-interest. Upon further exploration of the secret chamber, Daniel realized there were clear signs of a recent attempt to open the safe. Scratches, metallic marks, and slight changes in the position of objects indicated that someone or something had tried to interact with it unsuccessfully. This realization brought a new level of urgency. He was no longer just an investigator. He was entering territory of real risk, where every step could trigger irreversible consequences. Preparing for the climax required not only courage, but also absolute control over every action. He also realized the importance of time. The pattern of events within the mansion showed that the most intense occurrences happened at specific times of the night, almost as if the house had its own cycle. Daniel began to plan his actions during these periods, using the mansion's natural tension to his advantage. This temporal awareness brought a new rhythm to his preparation, making each move more calculated and strategic, like a chess player facing an invisible opponent. At the same time, Daniel faced intense emotional pressure. The constant presence of the unknown, combined with the urgency to uncover secrets, tested his mental resilience. He needed to balance his acquired rationality with the adrenaline coursing through his body. Every wrong step could reveal something that had remained hidden for decades, or worse, put him in danger. It was a delicate balance between control and instinct, between logic and intuition, that now became the key to facing the approaching climax. Finally, he mentally reviewed all the information he possessed: patterns in the mansion, historical clues, observed behaviors, partially resolved subplots, and signs of presence. Everything indicated that the climax would not only be a physical revelation, but a confrontation of perception and courage. Daniel knew he needed to be ready to react to unexpected events, to interpret almost imperceptible signs, and to use everything he had learned to make quick decisions. The tension was growing, the atmosphere heavy, and each moment brought him closer to the moment that would define his journey. As night fell completely, Daniel felt the mansion pulse with an intense presence. The silence became almost deafening, broken only by deep creaks and the slight crackling of the floorboards beneath his feet. He descended to the basement carefully, each step measured, each breath controlled. The secret chamber awaited him, and he knew that finally he would face the truth that had been buried since 1940. The air was cold, heavy, as if the house were aware of the arrival of the decisive moment. As he opened the chamber door, he noticed something that took his breath away. The ancient safe, once silent and still, now seemed to radiate an almost palpable presence. The embossed inscriptions gleamed in the flashlight, revealing patterns Daniel hadn't noticed before. A sudden noise behind him made him turn quickly, and the shadow that had been watching him reappeared. This time, it wasn't a distant figure. It seemed to materialize before his eyes, imposing and silent, but without explicit threats. Daniel felt his heart race, but he remained calm. He advanced to the vault, studying the inscriptions and mechanisms with precision. Every movement, every adjustment was crucial. The tension reached its peak when a part of the floor gave way slightly under his weight, and the sound echoed through the chamber, triggering an unexpected reaction. Shadows began to move around as if the mansion were alive, testing his resolve and courage. Daniel realized that the secret of the vault lay not only in its physical contents, but in the test of his own resilience. Suddenly, a sequence of events unfolded rapidly. The safe partially opened, revealing documents, antique objects, and photographs that directly linked the Whitmores to the darkest events of the 1940s. But the most disturbing revelation was one Daniel hadn't expected. Inside the safe was evidence that the family members themselves had tried to hide an unimaginable tragedy. Someone had been kept alive or imprisoned underground, their last decades shrouded in silence and secrecy. This discovery completely changed Daniel's perspective. It wasn't just about antique objects. The mansion held the living history of lives marked by fear and control. While he tried to process the information, the shadow approached again. This time, it wasn't just observation, there was interaction. Objects around him began to move, and the records inside the safe seemed to react to his presence. Every detail indicated that the mansion not only preserved secrets, but also reacted to the consciousness of those who dared to unravel them. Daniel felt a chill, but also an unprecedented clarity. The true climax wasn't just physical, it was the confrontation between the hidden past and his own courage to decipher it. Amidst the tension, Daniel saw an opportunity. Using what he had learned about the mansion's patterns and the shadow's movements, he carefully manipulated the objects, opened specific drawers, and organized the documents in a way that revealed the complete story. Every action was strategic, every movement calculated. Finally, the shadow seemed to dissolve, and the mansion returned to a deep, almost respectful silence. The secret had been revealed, and the mysterious presence, which had previously inspired fear, now seemed to recognize his persistence and courage. The climax ended with Daniel exhausted, but transformed. He understood that it wasn't just the mansion that held the secrets. He himself had discovered himself, overcome limits, and faced fears he had never imagined. The revelation of the basement and the vault not only clarified the historical mystery, but also marked Daniel's inner transformation, from someone dominated by fear to someone capable of confronting the unknown with determination and intelligence. The tension dissipated, but the feeling of respect for the place and the history it carried remained. With the secret of the basement finally revealed, the mansion seemed to breathe differently, as if it carried the weight of the past and could now rest. Daniel remained silent for a few moments, observing the open safe, the scattered documents, and the photographs that told a story no one had dared to reveal for decades. He realized that the mansion not only hid objects, but preserved memories, decisions, and consequences that had shaped the life of an entire family. Every detail, every mark on the walls, every old object now had meaning, and the narrative that was once fragmented was now complete before his eyes. Daniel's transformation became evident. He was no longer just a curious visitor or an intrigued researcher. He had become part of the history the house carried. His courage and persistence allowed long-buried truths to surface, and his perception and patience helped him interpret signs that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. The experience shaped him, making it clear that facing the unknown required more than bravery. It demanded understanding, strategy, and empathy for that which had been silenced by time. Furthermore, the interaction with the neighbor and the fragments of Whitmore's story brought a sense of closure. Although not all questions had definitive answers, Daniel managed to connect important dots, understand motivations, and uncover the injustices hidden by the family. He realized that the secret of the mansion was not just about mystery or fear, but about memory, legacy, and the responsibility of facing difficult truths. The narrative, now complete, showed that the past influenced the present and that every action, even decades later, had profound consequences. The atmosphere of the mansion, once heavy with tension and suspense, now conveyed a subtle calm. The silence that had once oppressed now seemed contemplative, almost respectful. Daniel walked through the corridors, observing the rooms with renewed attention. Each shadow and each object seemed to carry the history of past lives, and he understood that unraveling the mystery was not just about discovering secrets, but about recognizing the impact they had on the world and on those who revealed them. As he prepared to leave the mansion, Daniel felt a mixture of relief and awe. The danger and suspense still existed, but now they were under his control. He understood that true victory lay not only in opening doors or revealing safes, but in his own transformation. He had faced the unknown, learned from it, and emerged stronger, more perceptive, and more aware of his own ability to overcome challenges. Finally, the story that once seemed haunted by mysteries became a testament to courage, patience, and intelligence. Daniel understood that some stories needed to be revealed not only to satisfy curiosity, but to right injustices, understand motivations, and transform experiences into learning. The past of Whitmore Manor, once buried, could now coexist with the present, and the revelation of its secrets brought not only answers, but also a sense of emotional and intellectual closure for Daniel and for all who would learn his story in the future. Months after uncovering the secrets of Whitmore Manor, Daniel continued to reflect on everything he had experienced. The house, now silent, seemed to rest along with him, but the memories remained vivid. Every object, every shadow, and every detail of that final night still carried the intensity of what had been discovered. He knew the manor wouldn't change, but he indeed had been transformed forever. Daniel decided to document his experience, recording each step, each discovery, and each emotion he felt. It wasn't just an account of mystery. It was a testament to courage, patience, and learning in the face of the unknown. By sharing his story, he hoped others would understand that confronting what seems impossible requires a balance between fear and determination, curiosity and caution. As Daniel walked through the mansion's gardens at sunset, he felt a strange sense of peace. That place, which had once terrified him, now represented knowledge, overcoming challenges, and respect for the past. He knew that, although many details remained hidden, the essence of the truth had been revealed, and that would be enough for the mansion and its mysteries to finally find balance. If you felt captivated by the story of Whitmore Manor, Imagine what other old houses and secrets hidden by time can still reveal to us. Each mystery uncovered connects us with the past, teaches us about courage, and shows us that curiosity and perseverance can transform the unknown into learning. Don't keep this experience to yourself. Share the story with friends and family, comment on what intrigued you most, and join the conversation. Each reflection adds layers to the narrative and keeps alive the memory of secrets that have remained hidden for so long. Daniel's adventure is just one of many stories waiting to be discovered, and your opinion is part of this world of mysteries and discoveries.